Well, hey everyone, and welcome to the Crossway podcast. My name is Josh, and today I am in the studio with our student pastor, Colton Key.
Yeah, and I just want to kick us off today by talking a little bit about what we've been going through over the past several weeks on our Sunday morning services. We've been going through this sermon series called Beneath the Surface. It's been dealing with a lot of very pointed at specific emotions that we have and how we dive into those things and how our relationship with Jesus relates to those things and kind of how we work through certain, especially when it comes to like negative emotions and stuff like that. And a quick recap of this week, TJ had a great message that talked about fear and how we handle fear. And he talked through the story in Mark 4 where we get this description of Jesus and his disciples on a boat after Jesus and his disciples had done a lot of work sharing the good news with groups of people, and Jesus was tired and was resting. And while they were on a boat, they ran into this problem of weather, and the disciples became very fearful to the point where they literally thought that they were going to die. And he brought up some really great points. TJ did. While he talked us through this story of the disciples and their fear. And there's just a couple points that I want to point out before we kind of move into today's discussion. One is sometimes we end up in storms, as in moments where fear takes over our lives, even when we are followers of Jesus. I thought that was a really a good point that TJ made this weekend, because I think a lot of times we get this relationship with Jesus, we accept Christ into our heart, and we think everything's going to be good moving forward, and that's just not true. We've talked a little bit about this.
We've talked about that before.
And then another point that TJ made this week that I just thought was really good relating to that story out of Mark chapter 4 is when we find ourselves in fear, we tend to begin relying on everything else other than Jesus, which we see happening with the disciples on the boat, right? They're so scared, they start relying on all these things, and they're just to a point where they think that they're going to die, even though their access to safety is literally on the boat with them.
Yeah.
Right? And so those are just two great points that I wanted to kind of recap for us. And if you haven't watched that message yet, make sure to go to our YouTube YouTube link and YouTube channel.
Find it there. Mm-hmm. So something that we wanted to sort of piggyback off of that whole idea about and talk about, especially now, given the current state of culture and the whole presidential election and everything that's happening, and the sort of tension that's going on between a lot of people in our country. We wanted to talk about disagreement and that's relationship to fear, because oftentimes we mishandle the tension of disagreement in our lives because we're afraid. Right. This is sort of like what you were just saying about what TJ had to say about fear, sort of dictating the way that we handle situations or storms or points of tension in our life. And I think disagreement, especially in a culture and a climate like we're in now, is a big one of those. Like I said, we tend to mishandle that sort of storm. We mishandle that tension, and we do it on the basis of fear, right? So maybe we're afraid of losing a belief that we have, or looking stupid, or letting our emotions get the best of us, or seeming just like we don't know what we're talking about, or whatever it is.
Anytime we get trapped in that corner.
Yeah, every time there's tension or disagreement, we tend to let the default motivation and the default handlings be fear. And I think the biggest mistakes that we make when we have, or when we confront or find ourselves in the middle of disagreement, are really two things, and I think they're both motivated by fear. The first is we disengage or we disconnect, or we become defensive. Right?
Yes.
Like, I mean, speaking from my own life, this is the way it typically goes when I'm letting fear dictate the terms of disagreement. Right? I either am going to withdraw, and I'm not going to participate at all, or I'm going to become extremely defensive, maybe angry, maybe aggressive, divisive.
Yeah, which is I think why, especially when it comes to the defensiveness, is why I think humility becomes key. This is something that is I would admit is very true in my life, and in the way that I want to naturally handle conflict. Is I go about it through anger. And so you should approach your disagreement with the mindset that if anyone gets mad, if anyone is angry, you've lost. And that starts with you, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And before you say more about that, because I'm sure we could pull up verses and stuff, but I think what you're alluding to is exactly right. Like, instead of letting fear dictate the terms of our disagreement, we should let love dictate the terms of disagreement.
Absolutely.
Right. Let me now, with that in mind, like, just thinking about that, let me read to you the verse that we always read at weddings. But instead of thinking about weddings, let me read it in the context of this: letting love be the dictator about how you handle dissension and disagreement in your life. So 1 Corinthians 13, 4-6, everybody's going to know it from weddings. It says, love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud, it does not dishonor others, it is not self-seeking, it is not easily angered, it keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. And I think that's perfect for understanding the terms dictated, or the terms that should be understood within the context of disagreement and dissension, right? Because I don't think that disagreement is necessarily a bad thing.
Right.
Like, contending for something in a principled and reasoned way is a good thing, right? Like, that's the process we all go through in order to encourage one another to discover the truth, right? Like, we bring clashing ideas and we examine them. But that can be done in very unhealthy ways. And I think typically our default is, unless we put some things into practice, our default is to become afraid or to mishandle these things in that way. So back to sort of what you were saying about humility,
right.
The practical ways of making your disagreement be handled in terms of love as opposed to fear.
Yeah, so one of the things that I always encourage people to do in the midst of, okay, I'm angry, or we're using the word fearful, but I think fearful turns into anger. At least it does in my context most of the time when I feel some tension in a conversation, that fear turns into anger. And like I said a moment ago, if anyone is angry, if anyone leaves the conversation angry, then really we've lost.
Yeah.
And so what I encourage people to do usually from the get-go is, if you find yourself in a tense moment and you're immediately angry, don't dive into that conflict until you are on the other side of that anger.
Yeah.
Because like you mentioned a minute ago, like our goal is love. And so we want to resolve those issues in the conflict or the conversation, disagreement, whatever it might be, in the most healthy way. So first, we want to take care of our emotions, and then we want to make sure that we're treating the emotions of the other person properly as well.
I like what you're saying. If anyone gets angry, then you lose, right? Because if the other person gets angry, and even if you're not angry, I think you still lose, because the likely, and the goal and the goal and the seeking after of truth is not going to be accomplished very easily if somebody's upset, right? How often or how willing is somebody to see another point of view or change their mind about something if you're mad?
And I think while we're searching for truth together, really we should also be searching for like a sense of unity.
Right.
And that unity is not there if somebody left incredibly angry at the other. Right.
Yeah.
So we should let people see that you value them in those conversations, and not just your correct ideas. So when you're right in those moments, like, your goal is not to win and win your point of view. Your goal is to win that person over to the truth, or that person win you over to the truth.
Yeah.
And sometimes we don't want to admit that that's actually the reality,
right? Yeah.
Which I think we're going to talk about a little later. There's a couple verses here that I want to read to you. Philippians 2:3. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourself, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interest of the others.
Yeah.
So back to the unity and bringing everyone together. And and the reason we are concerned with others knowing the truth is that we care about who they are, the person of who they are, and trying to build into that unity. And they should be able to tell that is always the case.
Yeah. Yeah, so the motivation is love, and people need to understand that.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you do end up in a situation where it's just like somebody's getting mad, or you're getting mad if they don't feel or sense that the reason that you're engaging and the reason that you're concerned about their ideas or your own ideas or whatever is so that we can all be on the same page when it comes to truth, and that's a good thing, and we care about that in each other's lives.
Yes, so we should always. Sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, which like a Facebook stomping ground is probably not the best expression of that, if you ask me.
Gotcha.
It can be. Yep. It can be, but
Yeah, so our approach should always be humility, and what I think the best approach in difficult conversations or disagreement, kind of the starting ground is make sure your emotions are in check and make sure you understand that you're going into it to try to resolve unity and not push that person away with their own sense of anger.
Yeah, so humility. So
Humility.
exactly. Step one, if you want to handle disagreement in a healthy way, be humble. Another way that you can actually do this more practically is to become a student of other people's ideas. Oftentimes, we approach disagreement and the way that we see other people's ideas based on misunderstood or caricatured versions of other people's ideas, right? And this happens all the time because a lot of the times we're plugging in information into people's viewpoints and assuming a whole lot about what people actually believe.
Yeah.
And it's usually never
accurate.
Well, and not just accurate, but it's usually always a caricature because it's easy for us to tear down weak and bad versions of what people believe, right?
Yeah.
And that's just probably a default position that we tend to take. And so one of the best steps to move towards unity is to fully understand those who disagree with you, right? Like don't plug in those assumptions. Don't make up caricatured versions or assume everything, all the reasoning that somebody has for some idea before you actually become a student of their ideas themselves. Before you enter into the weeds of back and forth discussion, make sure that you have enough of the right information from that person in order to assess it correctly, right? Ask questions and make serious attempts to understand other people's point of views, because this is going to provide you with an avenue to not disconnect, but also not get defensive, right? This is going to give you a way of staying engaged and keeping everybody calm, because people want you to know what they really think, and they don't want you to caricature their ideas, right? You don't want that of other people, right? And so, yeah, one of the best ways that you can practice being humble in the middle of a conversation of disagreement is to take a step back and actually just listen to somebody explain themselves and understand all of that correctly. And this is a very biblical idea. I'm just going to read through a bunch of verses that all come out of Proverbs that speak into this. So Proverbs 17:27 says, "Whoever restrains his word has knowledge, and he who has a cool spirit is a man of understanding." And Proverbs 18:2 says, "A fool takes no pleasure in understanding, but only in expressing his opinion." And Proverbs 18:13 says, "If one gives an answer before he hears, it is folly and shame." And so, yeah, we can see, and I think we all know this, it's just hard to do in practice because we have all these assumptions in our head and we just want to immediately jump on them. But take a step back and listen, become a student of other people's ideas. And I can attest to the effectiveness of this, because not only does this help slow down the dissension, right? Because there's going to be conflict, right? I mean, that's just the nature of disagreement. But this helps slow down like the level of dissension, and it gives everyone sort of a calmer disposition about things.
Yeah, able to communicate with one another.
Yeah, I mean, and even if you end up still disagreeing with each other, after everything's been fully fleshed fleshed out and fully laid out on the table, you're at least ready then to talk specifically about the reasons and not about each other or about some caricatured version of their ideas, right?
You're actually talking about the topic at hand.
Right, and that will help you actually build trust with people because all of your discussion at that point is not around all of those superficial and made up and wrong-headed things, right? You're not mishandling someone else's ideas, and that's what nobody wants.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so speaking on being a learner from other people, I think we should fully develop our ideas and our beliefs, and I think we do that through some of that. And so often that we find ourselves as Christians, I believe, like getting really tense and uncomfortable when our belief systems are challenged because we've yet to do our due diligence in exploring what all of those things mean so that we can defend what those things mean. And this is something else I think we've even talked about a little bit in the past, but even outside of faith, even outside of Christianity, like anything that you feel uncomfortable with in the midst of a conversation is probably because you don't know as much about that topic as you could know, and therefore you're kind of backed into a corner. And so we should develop the discipline of quiet reflection and study. Like we should start understanding, grow in understanding, go out of our way and start learning the things that we need to learn, so that when we're put into those situations, we don't have that sense of fear. We don't grow angry or impatient or frustrated. Like we can conversate and still do it with that sense of unity, but do it with knowledge. Sorry, you were gonna say.
Well, I was just gonna add that that fear a lot of times just stems from people being afraid that they'll be convinced otherwise, right? Like I've experienced this in my life. Like somebody starts to challenge something that I believe, and I believe it willy-nilly, or I believe it on the basis of maybe something that's legitimate, like my parents told me this, and so I believe it, or whatever. But then somebody poses a challenge to it, and I've never thought any deeper than my parents told me this.
Right? Yeah, you don't really know.
Yeah, and so there's this fear that develops that's like, I don't want to be convinced to give up to this belief that I'm nostalgic about or something. So exactly what you're saying will help to alleviate that, right?
Yeah,
Nobody wants to nobody likes giving up and the beliefs that they've held, especially if you've held them for a long time.
And you don't have to, as long as you know that they're true and you have evidence and proof that they're true, right? Or at least evidence of. And so we should have a full understanding of our worldview as best as we can. There's some verses here that I want to read. And the reason I think this is important is that it keeps us out of the territory of defensiveness, okay? And so here are a few verses that I think are really important for us as we continue to talk about this topic. 2 Timothy 1:7, for the Spirit God gave us does not make us timid, but gives us power, love, and self-discipline. Proverbs, there's a couple out of Proverbs here. Proverbs 12:1, whoever loves discipline loves knowledge, but whoever hates correction is stupid. And I challenge you to go to your Bible and find that verse, because in most translations, the word stupid is actually used. Proverbs 24:5, the wise prevail through great power, and those who have knowledge muster their strength. Proverbs 15:14 is another one. The discerning heart seeks knowledge, but the mouth of the fool feeds on folly. So we need to be willing to give up our ideas and beliefs if they don't match up to the truth as well. And I think that's another point to be made, that when we are in these situations and we listen to reason, and that reason is pointed towards truth, even if it butts up against what we've been raised in or historically disagreed with, if it points towards the truth, we should be willing to hear those people out without falling into our typical self-defensive territory.
And that is related to what you said earlier about humility, right? Like that takes a certain level of humility. But a lot of these things that you've been suggesting of taking time to reflect on your ideas and to study and the disciplines of self-evaluation and really searching for truth and making a point, all of that will help facilitate the sort of humility that is necessary for that, because you start to prioritize knowing what the truth is when you do those things, and therefore you just become more open to it. I mean, I can speak to that. When I first, so I grew up as a Christian, right? I feel like a lot of people in the South probably grew up as Christians, and I can remember the first time that my faith was challenged out in the real world. It really sent me into like an existential crisis sort of thing, right? Like I was really flustered by the whole thing. But over time, as you develop the disciplines of stopping to think about everything that you believe and stopping to really reflect on the coherency of your own worldview, and does this really make sense? Does this really line up with the truth? That does facilitate within you this sort of mindset of being open to the truth. And so you'll end up finding yourself in situations where your ideas are being challenged, you're going to feel more open and be more open to the challenges because you're really and genuinely searching for truth. Especially
if we set our pride aside and at times admit our ignorance.
Yeah, which can be a tough thing to do.
Yeah.
But yeah, like you're saying, that sort of stuff is going to help facilitate that in your life. So. I know this has kind of been like just a brief overview, and there's a whole lot more that we could say. But hopefully, what I hope for is that people start shifting their mindset about disagreement, and they don't see. I don't want you to see disagreement as a negative thing.
Oh no! Yeah.
Even though it most certainly can be expressed that way, but instead, I think you should be thinking of disagreement as an avenue towards truth. Right. This is one
way of sharpening your mind.
Yeah, this is one of the main ways that we as people together discover truth together, right, and unify is by taking our ideas and if they clash, examining them and coming to some correct conclusions. So don't let fear dictate your understanding and interaction with disagreement, right? Let love dictate that. And you can do that by doing some of the things that we've discussed, right? Staying humble. Practice staying humble, submitting your spirit to the Holy Spirit. If you're a Christian, you have access to God Himself who is working in you in order to facilitate that in your life. Make it a point to understand one another fully and correctly, and don't assume things about other people. Become a listener and ask questions and fully understand people before you engage with them in sort of disagreement. And then make it regular practice, like Colton was just saying, for you to think deeply about your ideas and beliefs and to reflect on them and to challenge them and to criticize them yourself.
I was getting ready to say that.
Refine them yourself.
Don't wait on someone else to call out your belief. Call out your belief every once in a while and really work on improving and sharpening that belief. You might be right. You might come to the conclusion that you are always correct, but you should challenge that every once in a while and sharpen your mind in the process.
Yeah. Always be searching for and on the lookout for truth, right? Like that's what your worldview should orient around, regardless of. That's not a unique belief, I don't think, to Christians. I think everybody really wants that. It's just that Christians think that this is true, and that's why we engage in that sort of conversation. Anyway, so obviously now putting those things into practice is not going to guarantee that your interactions with people are all going to be healthy or that they're all going to be easy, right? Like it usually takes two to tango.
It takes two. It does.
So, I mean, there's no guarantee that you putting these things into practice is going to make every conversation that you have go smoothly.
I do think it'll help you personally, though.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it'll help you come out the other side of that conversation, regardless what the other person did.
Oh, absolutely.
In a lot healthier territory.
Yeah, this is regardless if somebody isn't handling their side of the situation appropriately, you should be handling your side appropriately. And something. Something that I just want to re-emphasize again, too, is because we usually fall into these two hard camps where it's like we get angry or defensive or we completely withdraw. And I want to encourage you guys to not do either of those things. I think engaging in disagreement and talking to each other is the way to unity. It is the way that you find truth, but just do it in a way that is obviously centered around love for each other, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that is what we wanted to just mention today and this week. I know this is kind of a little bit disconnected from the fear and the way that it played out in our lives that TJ was talking about, but I do think that this is one sort of example of a storm in our life that can often be dictated by fear, and I think it's one that we're wrestling with and struggling with right now, and probably will be for the foreseeable future. So anyways, if you want to check out, like Colton was saying, the service from this past week, just go over our YouTube channel or our Facebook page, and you can watch the full service there. And all the weeks of this Beneath the Surface series will be up there. If you're interested in listening to more of our podcasts from the past, you can find those on our YouTube channel or on our Facebook page or on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, any of those streaming platforms. Don't forget to download the Church Center app if you haven't already either. All this information and content can be accessed there. Thanks, guys, and we'll see you next time.